Hi there, my name's Archie and I'm a recovered alcoholic. Welcome to part 3 of my story. We finished off last time when I was leaving the Bridge program. When I was leaving the Bridge program, as I said before, I had a 5-year plan. That 5-year plan included living in Mount Barker, but I had nowhere in Mount Barker to stay. And my plan was to move into the Salvation Army residential services in Mount Barker, but at the time there were no vacancies. So I decided to stay on the program, or to stay at Eden Park a bit longer, until a place became available. And at the time, a mad Scotsman from West Australia turned up by the name of Peter Miller, who was starting a Red Shield Industries there at the time. So I went to work for Peter Miller as a volunteer on the Bridge program, basically clearing out the old schoolhouse, ringing up people in Mount Barker, telling them that we were starting a Red Shield Industries, and we were happy to take their donations if they wanted to give us. But as I said, my plan was to stay till a place became available at Red Shield Industries. But God prompted me, it was time to leave. And at the time, it was, I think, the week before my 26th birthday. And the counsellor at the time said to me, because, as part of my 5-year plan, God told me about Karen and that she was the one. And the counsellor said to me, she's coming up next week to do the chapel service, the Wednesday night chapel service. Why don't you stay? And I remember I said to him, don't worry about it, God's got it. God's told me to leave, and so I'm leaving. So I moved to residential services in Theberton in Adelaide at the time. And on the first Sunday, I went to Karen's church and introduced myself to her. And my introduction to her was, my name is Archie Boyle. I'm a hell of a guy. You stick around long enough and you'll find out I'm telling you the truth. And we've been together ever since. And part of, before I left the Bridge program, was to do a church service myself. I was asked to lead a church service, and that's the first time in my life I've ever been on a platform. I've had so many opportunities since, it's not funny. But leading that chapel service, I felt the power of the Holy Spirit in my life. I felt him take over. I felt him put the words into my mouth that he wanted me to say. So I moved to Theberton, and as I said, introduced to Karen, and then the place became available up in Mount Barker, residential services. So I decided, because it was on my 5-year plan, I would move back to Mount Barker. And when I did, I volunteered again for Red Shield Industries. There was a couple of guys who were employed by Red Shield Industries while I was away to actually do the building of the store fittings within the store, to revamp the stores, to get the stores ready for. And I remember saying to Peter Miller, Peter, how come you employed them and you wouldn't employ me? And he said to me, Archie, I never knew that you wanted a job. That day, I became the assistant manager of Red Shield Industries in Mount Barker. And I'd done everything from like I said, ringing people and telling them that we were starting a recycling industry, to driving the truck, to training the people to run the stores, to helping the two guys that were working there to build the stores. And I got, from the ground down, I got an education on the Salvation Army's recycling industry. And my relationship with Karen developed. I became, in October of 1996, a soldier of the Salvation Army in Mount Barker, which was part of my 5-year plan. It was always my intention. I knew that God wanted me to join the Salvation Army and to witness to people, to use my faith to witness to people about what God had done in my life and what he wanted to do in the lives of other people. At the same time, when I moved to Mount Barker, I was asked by the then superintendent of Red Shield Industries, Captain John Henderson, would I start an Alcoholics Victorious group that the men on the program could go to. So I started an Alcoholics Victorious group in Mount Barker. And in 1990, Karen and I got married and moved to the Mount Barker Core. And we loved our time in the Mount Barker Core. But there was moves afoot at Red Shield Industries. And John Henderson, who was then a major, came to me and said, would you like to come to Jepps Cross, which was their main industry that they just had put together. I reckon they built that factory just for me, because it started as I left Mount Barker, is when they actually bought the property. Before I actually moved to Melbourne, I stayed back in Adelaide 2 weeks to sell that property because the Salvation Army had decided to sell it. It was a 5,000 square metres square metre warehouse where I got my education on living life as a Christian. When I moved to Jepps Cross, Karen and I went to Kilkenny Salvation Army, which was her core where she grew up in. And in that core or church, we started a kids group. I ran an AV group. We did a ministry together to the Bridge program. The Bridge program down in Adelaide used to have a weekly service. Karen and I used to take people from our church and we used to go there and we used to conduct the services there as part of the roster. We also used to minister to Sunset Lodge, the aged care unit, because that's where Karen worked. That's where Karen's grandmother lived. And we actually used to go there regularly. As part of the first Alcohol Awareness Week, I was asked, would I feature my story? Or could they feature my story to promote the week? Which I was more than happy to do. And so my story became national. It was featured in the War Cry. It was featured in Drug Forum. It was featured in other papers. As part of that National Alcohol Awareness Week, I did a Channel 10 interview with Paul Macon on the Channel 10 News about my story and how God had changed my life. And I was contacted by Richard Berry at the time and asked would I consider doing a Christian television ad, which I did. It ran on the TVs in Adelaide for about 6 months, and it made my name a household name, and it opened many opportunities for me to share my story both in churches and in secular groups. I was asked to speak almost everywhere, and it was such an experience in my life. My story suddenly became an open book. People used to call me, what I said, I worked for Red Shield Industries. I became the Red Shield Industries manager when Major Henderson went to Melbourne to become the territorial leader. And people used to stop me in the shops and say, aren't you the bloke off the ad? And ask me stories about how God had changed my life. It was amazing. Eventually, I became the state manager of Red Shield Industries. Part of that being the state manager was that we actually put together a 12-bed rehab, which was part of the industry. So I actually used to run Red Shield Industries through the day and do the program with the guys in the houses at night time. In that year, Duncan was born. And the opportunities to share my story, as I said, became so much. While we were in Adelaide, we also had Mitchell, our second son. And then Major Henderson asked me one day, I'm driving in the car one day, and he rang me and said, I'd like you to consider coming to Melbourne as the National Transport Manager. It was the National Operations Manager, which meant I was in charge of the transport and what other operational things we had to do. So I went home to Karen. I remember going home to her and saying, by the way, we're moving to Melbourne in a couple of weeks. She knew nothing about it. So we moved to Melbourne and attended the Ferntree Gully Salvation Army. Part of our time at Ferntree Gully was the church was actually doing the 40 Days of Purpose. During the 40, and I was a local leader at the time in the church, in charge of the mission. And I actually, at the time, was asked to look after the small groups, starting up of small groups and getting them going for the Living Life Recovery. In that time, I was asked by a guy in the church to come and talk to his group. He had a stutter. And he asked me to come to talk to his group. And during that group, the leader of the group said, I would like everybody to take some time for personal reflection. In that time, I heard God speak to me, Archie, why are you not doing something with people with addictions? Because I'd moved away from it. I'd become so involved in the church that I'd stopped doing ministry stuff. And that's when Living Life Recovery was born, because I left that meeting knowing that's what God wanted me to do. And I said to God, where am I going to get curriculum? And because I was on the leadership team for the 40 Days of Purpose, I had access to Saddleback's website. And I seen the program Celebrate Recovery. And I loved the material, and I knew that's the material that I wanted to use for my ministry. And it is the material I've used to this day. My ministry is purpose driven, and the purpose is to introduce to people to individual relationships with Jesus Christ through the power of His Spirit and the 12 steps of recovery. When we were in going to Ferntree Gully Core, Ashley was born. And we left through a series of circumstances. We left the Salvation Army and started looking for new churches, and didn't feel comfortable in any of them until the day we visited Belgrave South Baptist Church, and decided that that was going to be our home church going forward. When we joined Belgrave South Baptist Church, it was like being born again. Because I knew then God wanted us there. So my wife became the kids' church leader, and I started up again a recovery group as part of that, and became a part of the leadership team. I left the Salvation Army, Red Shield Industries, family stores as they were then called, after 18 years. And it was 18 years that shaped my life and shaped my ministry. It taught me all about other people. Because I never seen it as a job, I seen it as a ministry. I seen it as part of reaching out to other people. There was nothing more important in that store than the welfare, than helping other people who were struggling to make it in life. So along with that, and along with my recovery stuff, my life was pretty full. I was also, like I said, in leadership within my local church. And when I left family stores after 18 years, it was a God calling. God told me it was time. So I left, not knowing where I was going. Rang Karen again and said, well, I've just quit my job. She said, what are we going to do? I said, I don't know. In the paper that week, I saw an interesting ad that I didn't really understand, but it sounded interesting to me. And it was working for a company installing energy efficient lights to replace incandescent lights, where I started there as an installer and ended up there becoming the assistant contract manager. And when the contract ended for them, again, I had nowhere to go. I had an appointment with the then territorial manager of the Salvation Army, Jim Nags, who decided that he wanted me to come back to work for the Salvation Army. So I then was employed by Melbourne 614, working with the homeless in the streets of Melbourne. A job that I did for 6 years, a job that I loved. A job that I also believe God called me to. While I was at 614, I started a Celebrate Recovery group, but it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is because it was working with most of the people who came to the group were homeless. And it just didn't work because it relied too much on me. And if you're thinking of starting your own recovery group, make sure you've got a support team, because I didn't have a support team. And when I left 614, I stopped doing that group and started a recovery group at Crossway Baptist Church. And I also started a group in a car yard in Dandenong. So for a period of my life, those were my two groups, were Living Life Recovery at Dandenong and Be Together Recovery at Crossway. Around 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And from there, I really thought I was going to die. I believed that cancer was going to get me, because my dad died of cancer. My grandfather died of cancer. And I thought that was my lot, to die of cancer. But I kept going. And then 3.5 years ago, I had treatment for prostate cancer and have been going well for ever since. At the end of my treatment, I began a job that I'm in now, where I'm working down in Gippsland, where I am right at the moment, as the offshore logistics manager for oil and gas, where I'm in currently my 4th year of employment. Basically, my job is to ensure that the oil rigs in Bass Strait have enough food and enough cleaning products. In the last few years, we have left, my wife and I, Belgrave South Baptist Church, and now attend Narre Warren Baptist Church, where I hope that God will help me to find out where I fit in order to glorify Him and lead others to relationship with Him. The constants in my life since I said yes to Jesus in 1989 are obedience. I haven't always known where God wanted me to go. I always knew where He wanted me to go, but I didn't know how I was going to get there. Because God in my life has been pretty clear at showing me where He wants me to be. I believe that every stage of my life, since I became a Christian, God has led me there, because I made a decision Jesus said, "Follow me and I will lead you." And all I've done to that day, from that day on, is try to follow him in obedience. My focus has been on recovery. No matter what I've done, recovery has stayed a focus of my life. The number one priority in my life is my recovery. It will always be my recovery. And some Christians might not agree with that. But if I didn't have recovery, I wouldn't turn to God. God would have no place in my life if I started drinking and taking drugs. The other constant in my life has been my family. My wife and my 3 children have been my rock. They've always been there. They've seen me in my bad times. They've seen me in my good times. The other thing I've had is church support. All my recovery life, I've had somebody in the church. Major John Henderson became my mentor. Robert Coleman became my mentor. I've had other people, other men of faith, who spoke into my life and set me on the right track when I've been going wrong. I've had lots of support from people in the church, or I wouldn't be here right now. The other constant in my life is I like to get involved. I don't want to be a pew sitter. I want to be a person that makes things happen. God challenged me many years ago to be different and make a difference. And if I'm not making a difference, then it's not worth it. Because that's what it's all about. It's about finding out God's will for your life and doing what he wants you to do, being what he wants you to be, making a difference with the people that he puts in your path to make a difference with. I don't know how you could possibly walk the road of recovery and not be interested in service. Step 12 is all about serving God and serving other people. And it's not God as we understand him, because I don't understand God. What I do understand is I was an alcoholic and a drunk. I said yes to him when he invited me to, and my life became different. I'm not the same person I used to be. My faith is very simple. God opens doors and I walk through them. He's done that since day one. As I said, I had a 5-year plan that took me 3 years to achieve. Everything on that 5-year plan, I can tick off. But I know that God's not finished with me yet. Thank you for listening to my story. I look forward to talking to you next week when we move to subject-based recovery, where we look at subjects that we all face in life and how God and the Bible tells us to deal with them. Thank you again. I look forward to talking to you next week.